I had just landed back home after 2 weeks in Hawaii, feeling refreshed and ready to sleep in my own bed again. The trip had been long overdue, a well-earned break from the chaos of work and everyday life. But the moment I pulled into my driveway, I knew something was off. There were cars in my driveway. Cars I didn't recognize. I blinked, wondering if I was at the wrong house. But no, my house number was right there, clear as day. My porch light was on, and my security camera, which I had checked throughout my vacation, was still in its usual spot. I parked on the curb, heart pounding as I got out of the car. Through the front window, I could see movement, people inside. People laughing. Someone walked past the window with a drink in hand, like they were throwing a party. My hands were shaking as I walked up to the door. I reached for my key, slid it into the lock, and it didn't turn. "What the hell?" I muttered. I tried again, twisting the key harder. Nothing. My lock had been changed. Panic shot through me like lightning. My stomach twisted into a knot, and a million thoughts rushed through my head. Had I been robbed? Did someone break in? I rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, a middle-aged man answered, holding a beer in one hand. His face twisted in confusion as he looked me up and down. Can I help you?" he asked. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This man, this complete stranger, was standing inside my house like he belonged there. "Yeah, you can help me," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. "This is my house." "What the hell are you doing in it?" The man raised an eyebrow. Then he laughed. I rented it. Through Airbnb." "Airbnb?" The words didn't even make sense to me. My head spun, my breath caught in my chest. "There must be some mistake," I said, shaking my head. "I own this house. I never listed it for rent." Now the man looked uneasy. "Look, I don't know what to tell you. We paid for 2 weeks. We checked in last Monday. If this is your house, then I think you should talk to whoever rented it out, 'cause we booked it fair and square." My jaw clenched. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Who gave you the keys?" I asked. "The host," the man said. "Some guy named Robert." Robert. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Robert was the HOA president. That's when it all clicked. My home hadn't been robbed. It had been stolen, by the very person who was supposed to protect the neighborhood. I took a step back, pulling my phone out of my pocket. My hands trembled as I opened my security camera app, scrolling through the footage. What I saw made my blood boil. 3 days after I left for Hawaii, Robert had walked up to my front door with a locksmith. I watched as they changed my locks, right there, in broad daylight. He even had the nerve to take my spare key from its hiding spot under the porch light. Then, a day later, a group of people arrived with suitcases. My home, my personal space, had been turned into a damn vacation rental. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. This wasn't just a violation. This was illegal. I looked back up at the man in my doorway. "I'm gonna need you to leave." He frowned. "Look, I understand you're upset, but we paid for this place. I'm not leaving until I get my money back." I gritted my teeth. As much as I wanted to drag every last one of them out myself, I knew I had to play this smart. I needed proof. I needed legal action. So I did the only thing I could do. I called the police. The 911 operator listened patiently as I explained the situation. "You're saying someone rented out your home without your permission?" "Yes," I snapped. "And I have security footage to prove it." The dispatcher assured me an officer would be on their way. Minutes felt like hours as I stood outside my own home, heart pounding, watching strangers lounge in my living room like they belonged there. Finally, 2 squad cars pulled up. A tall officer with a stern expression stepped out, walking toward me. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes," I said, barely able to contain my frustration. "I just got back from vacation, and I found strangers living in my house. The HOA president rented it out without my consent." The officer glanced at the house, then at the guests. Do you have proof of ownership? I pulled up my mortgage documents and deed on my phone. The officer nodded, then turned toward the renters. Sir, he said to the man at the door, I need you to step outside. The renter sighed, looking more annoyed than anything, but he complied. Look, we booked this place fair and square, he argued. We have a rental agreement. We paid good money for this. The officer took the man's phone, scrolling through the Airbnb listing. Who was your host? That guy, the renter said, pointing at the screen. Robert. Bingo. The officer's jaw tightened as he turned back to me. We're going to need to contact him. Oh, don't worry, I said. I'll handle that. As the police started talking to the renters, I stormed down the street toward Robert's house. He lived just 3 doors down from me, one of those guys who loved to flaunt his power, acting like he was the king of the neighborhood. His front lawn had a giant HOA-approved sign that read, Community standards begin here. I pounded on his door so hard I was surprised it didn't come off the hinges. A few seconds later, Robert opened the door. He had the nerve to smile. Welcome back. How was your trip? My vision went red. Don't play games with me, Robert. I know what you did. His smile faltered. I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, really? I pulled out my phone, shoving the security footage in his face. You broke into my home. You changed my locks. And then you rented it out. I have everything recorded. For a second, he just stared. Then, he chuckled. Listen, you're overreacting. The HOA has the authority to oversee community properties, and since your house was vacant, You stole my home, I growled. And you're going to pay for it. His smug grin finally dropped. Now, let's not be rash. Oh, it's too late for that, I shot back. The police are already involved. And trust me, you're about to lose everything. Robert paled. I turned on my heel and walked away. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And I was going to make sure he regretted ever messing with me. I barely slept that night. Even after the police had spoken to the renters and forced Robert to hand over my new keys, I couldn't shake the rage boiling inside me. I had spent years making that house my home, and in a matter of days it had been turned into a rental by the very person who was supposed to uphold the rules. But this wasn't over. Not even close. As I lay awake, staring at my bedroom ceiling, I knew one thing for sure: Robert had been too confident. Too smug. This wasn't a simple mistake. He had done this before. And I was going to prove it. The next morning, I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down at my laptop. If Robert had done this to me, how many others had been victims? I started with Airbnb. Searching my neighborhood's name, I scrolled through the listings, looking for any familiar houses. My stomach dropped when I found them. At least 4 other homes were listed as short-term rentals, homes that belonged to my neighbors. I recognized them immediately. And the worst part? Every single one had the same host. Robert. I clenched my fists. He wasn't just abusing his power as HOA president, he was running an entire rental operation under everyone's noses. But I needed more proof. I decided to reach out to my neighbors, starting with Mr. and Mrs. Carter, an elderly couple who lived a few houses down. They were in their 70s, sweet people who had lived in the community for decades. If anyone had been targeted, it was them. I knocked on their door, and after a few moments, Mrs. Carter answered with a warm smile. Oh dear, welcome back. How was your vacation? I forced a smile, but my mind was racing. It was good, except for the part where Robert rented out my house without my permission. Her expression fell. Oh my goodness. That's awful. Mrs. Carter, I said, lowering my voice. Has anything like this happened to you? She hesitated, glancing back into the house before stepping onto the porch. Well, now that you mention it, something strange did happen last summer. My heart pounded. What happened? We were visiting our son in Florida for a few weeks. she said. When we came back, we noticed little things out of place. Our guest towels had been used, and there was a strange smell in the house, like cologne we didn't recognize. We thought maybe one of our kids had stopped by, but when we asked them, they all swore they hadn't been here. My blood ran cold. Did you check your security cameras? I asked. She shook her head. We don't have any. Of course. That was why Robert had picked them. They wouldn't have had any proof, just a lingering sense of unease. And since nothing was outright missing, they probably brushed it off. Mrs. Carter, I think Robert has been renting out homes without permission, I said. Not just mine, other people's too. Her eyes widened. That's horrifying. How can he get away with something like that? He won't, I promised. Not anymore. I spent the rest of the day gathering evidence. I talked to more neighbors. Some had experienced similar things, mail going missing, furniture being slightly out of place when they returned from trips. But no one had ever considered the possibility that their homes had been lived in while they were away. The more I dug, the worse it got. A few of the homes Robert had listed on Airbnb weren't even owned by people who traveled. They were owned by retirees who were often home. So how was he pulling it off? That's when I found my answer. After hours of research, I discovered something chilling. Robert had filed fake lease agreements with the HOA for certain properties. In the HOA bylaws, there was a clause that allowed temporary leasing for community-managed rentals, under exceptional circumstances. It was meant for emergencies, like if someone had to relocate for medical reasons or if a homeowner requested a temporary rental due to financial hardship. Robert had been forging homeowner signatures on fake lease agreements to make it look like they had authorized their homes to be rented out. It was fraud. Big-time fraud. I wasn't stopping there. If Robert had been making money off my home, I wanted to know exactly how much. I called Airbnb's customer support, pretending to be a traveler inquiring about a previous stay at one of the homes listed under Robert's account. After some back and forth, I managed to confirm something insane. Robert had been renting my house for $300 per night. 2 weeks at $300 a night. He had made over $4,000 off my home alone. Multiply that by the 4 other homes I had discovered, and we were talking about tens of thousands of dollars in illegal profits. This wasn't just fraud. This was a full-blown criminal operation. I wasn't about to let Robert get away with it. That night, I did something bold. I called him. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Hello? It's me, I said, voice cold. There was a long pause. What do you want? I know everything. Silence. I know you forged lease agreements, I continued. I know you've been illegally renting out homes in this neighborhood for years. I know you've made tens of thousands of dollars from it. And I know that if I report this to the authorities, you're looking at serious jail time. Robert finally spoke, his voice lower now. You don't have proof. I laughed. Oh, I do. I have security footage. I have Airbnb records. I have copies of your fake lease agreements. I even have homeowners who are willing to testify against you. Another silence. Then, in a nervous, forced chuckle, Robert said, Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Maybe we can work something out. I gritted my teeth. The only thing you can do right now is prepare for what's coming next. I hung up. By the time I put my phone down, I had already decided on my next step, legal action. I wasn't just going to expose Robert to the HOA board. I was going to sue him for every penny he had stolen from me. And when I was done with him, he wasn't just going to lose his position as HOA president. He was going to lose everything. I had all the proof I needed. I had security footage of complete strangers living in my home. I had screenshots of my house being listed for rent. I had copies of fake lease agreements with forged signatures. And I had my neighbors, many of whom were finally realizing they had been victims too. But proof wasn't enough. I needed action. And that's when I decided I wasn't just going to expose Robert. I was going to ruin him. First, I called a lawyer. I wasn't sure if this would be a civil case or a criminal one, but either way, I needed an expert on my side. After some research, I found a law firm that specialized in real estate fraud and HOA disputes. I scheduled an emergency consultation. The next morning, I sat across from a sharp-looking attorney named Mark Holloway. He flipped through the evidence I had brought, screenshots, security footage, and copies of Robert's fake lease agreements. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is textbook fraud," he said. "You have more than enough to file a civil lawsuit. And based on the forgery, we can also report this as a criminal matter." I nodded. "I don't just want my money back. I want him out of the HOA. Permanently." Mark smirked. "Oh, don't worry. By the time we're done, he won't just lose his position, he'll be lucky if he doesn't end up in prison." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. Before filing the lawsuit, I needed to do one more thing: turn the HOA board against Robert. Now, I hated HOA meetings. They were always full of pointless bickering, but this time? I was looking forward to it. I made sure to bring printed copies of my hardest-hitting evidence, screenshots of my home's Airbnb listing, my security footage stills, and a spreadsheet of Robert's rental income. When I walked into the meeting, Robert was already there, looking confident. He clearly thought he could talk his way out of this. He was wrong. The HOA president, a woman named Linda, looked around the table. "All right, let's get started. I believe we have a few homeowner concerns tonight." I stood up. "I do." Robert smirked. "Ah, yes, our resident troublemaker." I ignored him and slapped the evidence down on the table. "I have proof that Robert has been illegally renting out homes in this community, including mine." The room went silent. Linda frowned. "That's a serious accusation." I turned to the other board members and slid the evidence across the table. "That's my house, listed as a rental for $300 a night. I was on vacation when it was rented out by complete strangers. And Robert was the one who listed it." Murmurs erupted around the room. Linda picked up the paper and scanned it. "Robert, is this true?" Robert let out a fake laugh. "Oh, come on. This is a misunderstanding. I help manage community rentals, and there was clearly a mix-up with some paperwork." I leaned forward. "A mix-up? You forged lease agreements." Robert's smirk vanished. One of the board members, an older man named Greg, narrowed his eyes. "Robert, you told us the HOA had no involvement with short-term rentals. Now you're saying you manage them?" Robert shifted in his seat. I was helping streamline the process." "You were stealing from homeowners," I interrupted. "You've been running an illegal rental scheme, and I can prove it. I already have a lawyer, and I'm filing a lawsuit." At the word lawsuit, the room exploded. Board members started arguing. Robert looked pale. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Linda cleared her throat. "All right, let's calm down. I think it's best if we put Robert on temporary leave while we investigate these claims." Robert jumped up. "You can't do that." Greg crossed his arms. "You don't seem to be in a position to make demands, Robert." I could see it in his eyes. He knew it was over. But I wasn't done. Robert had ruled the HOA with an iron fist for years. People feared him. He was the guy who fined people over trivial violations: a mailbox that was 2 inches too tall, a front yard that had one weed too many. But now, he was the one in trouble. I decided to take things one step further. I wrote up a detailed email outlining everything Robert had done: his forgery, his illegal rentals, and his abuse of power. I sent it to every homeowner in the neighborhood. Within hours, my inbox exploded. People were furious. Many of them had been fined by Robert in the past. Others had suspected something shady was happening but didn't know the full story. By the next day, a petition was circulating to remove Robert from the HOA board. The day after my email went out, I got a call. It was Robert. I let it go to voicemail, but he left a message. His voice was shaky. Desperate. "Listen. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can work something out." I can compensate you. Just call me back, okay? I laughed. The man who had stolen from me was now begging for mercy. I did not call him back. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. Mark, my lawyer, wasted no time. We officially filed a lawsuit against Robert for fraud, trespassing, and illegal profits. He had made over $20,000 from his scheme, and we were going after every penny. At the same time, the HOA board voted to remove him permanently. It was over. Robert went from being the most feared man in the neighborhood to a disgraced fraudster facing legal consequences. Just when Robert thought things couldn't get worse, I decided to give him a taste of his own medicine. I found an Airbnb listing for his own house. It had his name on it, his address, and a perfectly legal rental agreement. I didn't actually rent his house out, but I made sure to email him the listing. With a simple message. Karma's a funny thing, isn't it? And just like that, the HOA tyrant was finally taken down. Robert may have been removed from the HOA board, but I wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Because what I had uncovered so far, the fraud, the illegal rentals, the forgery, was just the tip of the iceberg. The deeper I dug, the more I realized. Robert wasn't working alone. And the entire HOA board was involved in something much, much worse. The morning after I sent my lawsuit to Robert, I found an anonymous letter taped to my front door. No name. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper with one sentence. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Whoever sent this knew what I was doing. They were watching me. But instead of scaring me off, it did the exact opposite. I was more determined than ever to burn the entire corrupt system down. With my lawyer's help, I started tracing the finances of the HOA. Robert had already stolen over $20,000 from homeowners by illegally renting out properties. But what about the HOA itself? Where was all the money from our dues going? I requested financial statements from the HOA. They stalled. They delayed. They claimed they needed time to gather the records. I wasn't buying it. So I decided to do some digging on my own. I started talking to neighbors. Asking questions. That's when I met Mr. Thompson. He had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years and had been complaining for months about a roof leak in the HOA clubhouse. The HOA keeps saying they're waiting on repairs, he told me. But every time I ask, they say the funds are already allocated. That caught my attention, because I had looked through some of the HOA's public records. And according to their financial reports, the HOA had already spent over $50,000 on clubhouse maintenance just this year. $50,000. But there had been no repairs. So where did all that money go? I was about to find out. With the help of my lawyer, I dug deeper into the HOA's finances. That's when we uncovered a second bank account, one that wasn't listed in the official HOA records. And guess whose name was attached to it? Linda, the HOA president. The same Linda who had temporarily suspended Robert but hadn't kicked him out completely. The same Linda who had ignored homeowners' complaints about missing funds for years. The money that was supposed to be used for repairs wasn't going to contractors. It was going straight into Linda's pocket. I confronted Linda at the next HOA meeting. I didn't even give her a warning. I walked in, slammed the financial documents onto the table, and let the evidence speak for itself. Linda, can you explain why over $50,000 of homeowner dues were spent on repairs that never happened? Her face turned white. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Oh, really? I slid another document toward her. Because this bank account, the one the HOA conveniently forgot to disclose, says otherwise. And guess whose name is on it? Silence. The other board members started whispering. One of them, Greg, looked furious. Linda, is this true? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because she knew she was caught. That's when someone stood up from the audience. It was Janet, the HOA's bookkeeper. She looked nervous but determined. I can confirm it, she said. Linda has been transferring HOA funds into her personal account for years. And Robert was in on it too. Linda's eyes went wide. Janet don't. But Janet was done covering for them. I have emails, documents, transaction records, everything. She turned to me. I can prove it. With Janet's evidence, we took everything to the police. What started as a civil lawsuit against Robert turned into a full-blown criminal investigation into the HOA's finances. Linda and Robert weren't just kicked off the board, they were charged with fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. The HOA's entire leadership crumbled. And for the first time in years, the homeowners finally had a voice. In the weeks that followed, things changed fast. Small Blue Diamond Robert was arrested for real estate fraud and forgery. Small Blue Diamond Linda resigned in disgrace and faced embezzlement charges. Small Blue Diamond, a new HOA board was elected, one that actually listened to homeowners. Small Blue Diamond, the stolen funds were recovered, and real repairs finally began. But the best part? The homeowners, people who had been afraid of the HOA for years, finally took their power back. Just as I thought it was over, I received one final email. It was from Robert. Subject: You ruined everything. I opened it. It was short. I hope you're happy. You destroyed my life. You should have just let it go. I smiled. And I replied with just one sentence. Enjoy your new home, prison. Robert and Linda were finally exposed. The corrupt HOA board had been dismantled, their crimes laid bare for everyone to see. But I wasn't done yet. Because justice isn't just about exposing the guilty. It's about making sure they pay for what they've done. And I was about to make sure they never got away with it. The case against Robert and Linda moved fast. With all the evidence we had gathered, emails, bank statements, fraudulent rental agreements, there was no way out for them. But that didn't stop their lawyers from trying. This is all a misunderstanding, Robert's attorney argued in court. My client believed he was acting in the best interest of the HOA. I almost laughed out loud. The best interest of the HOA? By stealing homes? By forging signatures? By embezzling money? Linda's lawyer tried a different tactic. She was just following the board's recommendations, he said. She had no idea there was anything illegal happening. That's when my lawyer stood up. We'd like to present Exhibit A, he said, handing a document to the judge. It was a bank transaction record. And it showed exactly where the stolen HOA money had gone. Straight into Linda's personal account. The courtroom went silent. Even Linda looked shocked, as if she still believed she could somehow lie her way out of this. The judge flipped through the documents, then looked up at her. Would you like to explain this? Linda opened her mouth. Then shut it. Because there was no explanation. She was guilty, and she knew it. A few weeks later, the verdict came in. Small Blue Diamond Robert was sentenced to 5 years in prison for real estate fraud and forgery. Small Blue Diamond Linda received 3 years for embezzlement and financial misconduct. Small Blue Diamond, the HOA, was fined over $100,000, with all stolen funds returned to homeowners. And just like that, the nightmare was over. You'd think I would be satisfied with the court victory. But I had one last move to make. Because I knew how these HOA tyrants worked. They go to prison. They serve their time. And then? They move to a new neighborhood and do it all over again. I wasn't about to let that happen. So I took everything I had learned and turned it into a public case study. I contacted local news outlets, HOA watchdog groups, even real estate blogs. And I made sure Robert and Linda's names were everywhere. If they ever tried to worm their way back into a position of power, people would know exactly who they were. Their reputation? Destroyed. Their power? Gone. They could never scam another homeowner again. With Robert and Linda gone, the HOA finally got a fresh start. We elected new board members, people who actually cared about the community. Small Blue Diamond monthly financial reports were made public. Small Blue Diamond, no more secret fines or shady rental deals. Small Blue Diamond, every homeowner had a voice. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community again. No more fear. No more HOA tyranny. Just peace. Looking back, it still shocks me how close I came to losing everything. If I hadn't installed security cameras, if I hadn't fought back, if I had just given up, Robert would still be renting out my home. Linda would still be stealing HOA funds. And homeowners would still be living in fear. But I fought back. And in the end, I won. So if you're ever dealing with an HOA nightmare like this, don't stay silent. Fight back. Because sometimes, the only way to deal with corrupt power is to destroy it completely.